Right now we're at 6 and Vietnam is, I think, over 30. But in 2011, Vietnam was already at 30 million bags and we're still stuck at 6. And what did? They killed all the noise. I think if you want to do business, the art is like kill all the noise, make things practical, get them, tackle them, give them 100 legs and walk. And I think what we need to do this is make sure we focus on 4 or 5 interventions, making them more resilient in terms of shade trees, other crops, better cash flow, giving access to finance for inputs for the farm, but also the social services.
Do you aspire for a booming middle-class economy? Listen along and understand what turns the wheels of Uganda's economy with our line of incredible influencers in their fields.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome yet again to another episode of the podcast on sectors, where we seek to find out those sectors that fuel the wheels of Uganda's economy. I'm Agi Patricia Turomwe, the host of the podcast on Uganda, and we're in luck today because we're going to talk about the business of sustainability in agriculture. Today, I'm with the former head of sustainability and agronomy at UGACOF, Sjaak De Bloois. Welcome to the podcast. Back in the day, my grandmother in Bushenyi, every holiday you'd go to visit, she'd say, "Oh, I'm planting moringa now." The other time she's planting papaya, the other time she's planting coffee, just because her neighbors are planting coffee and because they have a market for the product at that time. But I want you to help us understand. You've been in Uganda too long, since 2012. What is happening right now in the coffee industry? You've tested other crops also in other countries. Bring us up to speed.
Okay. So what everyone is talking about right now is a new European import regulation called EUDR. This sounds all very complicated, but let's break it down. EUDR means that every container that's being imported into Europe needs to have a kind of evidence that wherever they source the coffee from, that there was no deforestation. It's a bit of a complex with data and all sorts of stuff, but very important to know that almost 60% of all the coffee being produced is going to Europe. If we as an industry do not work together and make this thing work, it means we lose out on an enormous market.
Why aren't you working together?
I think the Ugandan coffee industry is actually at this moment world leading in terms of having the different exporters to sit on the table. We're very blessed with an organization like Coffee Africa who've been here for the last 18 years doing it. It's a journey of a lot of unknowing, a lot of convincing people, a lot of trust. The tech is ready, solutions are there, but we need people who can share the vision. If we do this, we don't only tackle a challenge, but we're opening a huge opportunity for the Ugandan economy and our 2 million farmers to actually thrive and keep growing coffee.
Our listeners are quite interested in farming. In 2023, our top most listened to podcast was about moringa farming. I would think they pretty much always love digital. So all the trending episodes have digital, social media. If you were to help us understand, coffee is not a new crop. Coffee is a cash crop in Uganda. The EUDR just came up recently. How are people farming differently today? And how do you think that is shaping the opportunities that present themselves?
Let me be frank, I think indeed, like you said, the coffee industry is many decades old. And you hardly not find anyone in Kampala who doesn't have a relative who eventually paid for their school fees or their studies 20, 30, 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Very important to know that Uganda is doing an excellent job in terms of promoting coffee growing. And later on, I'll also explain why, because the potential of additional revenues for the Ugandan economy is huge if we're comparing it to many other crops. So, well, we see most of the neighboring coffee origins, countries that also grow coffee, Rwanda, Kenya, Burundi, you see farmers are giving up farming. That has to do maybe with not enough support. They don't feel empowered. They're somewhere at the bottom of the chain. Well, in Uganda, actually, the crop is growing. We're roughly at 6 million bags of coffee exports. In coffee terms, we talk about bags, and those are green coffee beans, roasted by the roasters like Starbucks, Nespresso all over the globe. So we count the size of a coffee nation in terms of bags.
You are very well placed because you've grown up on a farm with your parents. You also have exported and you also consume. For those who don't know, Ugandans are not coffee consuming people, but you have that opportunity perspective from those three angles. I'd like to know from your perspective, just to bring it back home, give us an overview of coffee industries in Africa.
Good point. I think it's very important to know that coffee trade is not coffee. At Sukafina, I had that exposure that I could see how my colleagues were dealing with coffee. In Kenya, as an exporter, you're legally not allowed to engage with a farmer. You have to buy your coffee from an auction. Whether you talk about Colombia, most of the coffee comes through very organized cooperatives. There, if you're a coffee exporter, you need to learn how to work with cooperatives. If you talk about Burundi, it's the government paying the farmers. Now, when we come back to Uganda, let us land here. Uganda is an open economy since the last 30 years. That means we as exporters, we source from farmers directly between 10 and 15%. We get maybe 70-80% through local middlemen. There is cooperatives, there's farmer groups, sometimes there's a few farm estates. So here there is a huge variety of how you as an exporter could potentially engage. I think that creates a lot of opportunity, but in terms of regulation, in being able to say this container I bought exactly from this farmer, then it actually becomes a challenge because these local traders or middlemen cannot always tell you in detail where they bought the coffee from. Sometimes there's even like 6-7 steps, or maybe 8 or 9, before that container of coffee actually arrives at our dry mills, our export facilities in Kampala. That makes us unique.
Unique, but also sounds like a challenge. Do the varieties matter? Arabica, Robusta?
Yeah, 80% of what we're exporting and producing is Robusta. 20% is Arabica. In general, Arabica is a commodity that is priced a bit higher. But what we see in the world with climate change, if in 10 years from now it becomes slightly warmer, the only areas where we can still grow Arabica is at far top on the mountains, and it means we're losing a lot of acreages. We are an absolute Robusta country. When it comes on global, why people call us, our roasters are like a chef cook. If they want Robusta, they know that the Robusta from Uganda has a certain chocolate taste. Robusta from Vietnam has maybe a citrus, lemony taste. The cook that is the roaster, he will just pick up the phone and say, we need this chocolate ingredient. Let's call Uganda. The Robusta market, the Robusta, it makes us quite famous. And because of great efforts of government, UCDA, collaboration, we have really spiked and hiked the quality of our coffee. Basically, we're starting to show up at the world map.
That's true, because if you listen to the news and even just the farmers, they're talking about how the prices right now are so good. This is start of April. You talked about climate change and you are in the business of sustainable agriculture or agribusiness, and you have a goal. You are chairman of the EUDR task force in Uganda. Tell us about that vision. We have a target of achieving a middle class by 2040. You are a decade away. Tell us about your vision for the EUDR now that we know, dear patriots, that it's about deforestation. They just want to track who is not cutting or cutting down trees.
Former head of agronomy and sustainability. When the EUDR thing was published, every country and all the exporters became a bit nervous. Because the moment you land or import one container where there's such an error, they're basically charging like 4% of your gross annual income. A company like Sukafina could potentially import $2 billion worth of coffee. If you then take a 4% penalty, that means $80 million. Even big organization like us, it would mean you're instantly done, you're finished. So really,
Meaning, a farmer in Masaka today with their coffee, if they don't follow SOPs for EUDR, they can't get part of that share.
If his coffee ends up in a container and his coffee comes from a farm, in the last 3 years there was aggressive deforestation, that piece of information that was attached to the container of coffee. If that will be analyzed and they figure out like you have exported coffee that was part or guilty of deforestation, so UGACOF is maybe roughly exporting between 3 and 4,000 containers every year. Every small container is a potential huge risk for the importer. Sometimes the importer is Sukavina itself, mother company of UGACOF. Sometimes it's the roaster. And roasters, then you're talking about dozens of billions of dollars of turnover. So 4% of that means a big problem. So everyone is scared. And what happened here, we as exporter came together to protect our business and say, like, okay, how can we work together? How do we map all the farmers? How do we find a methodology that complies with what the EU wants? So we set up a task force where Jeremy is the managing director of Jagalani.
Okay.
He is the chairman, and I'm one of the very active other exporters who's always like with practical insights.
Yeah.
Vision 2030. So everyone is terrified of this thing. And yeah, for exporters to sort this out, it's very costly. Well, nobody wants to pay for those extra efforts. So we have a problem there. But what I want to explain is actually how we can flip this huge challenge into an opportunity.
Okay.
And here we go.
Wait a minute. Do you know what it will take for Uganda to achieve a middle class economy by 2040? Please send us an email at onuganda@gmail.com.
I just want to put a disclaimer of the numbers. They're round numbers, they're proxies, they could slightly change, but I just want to make a point of opportunity in coffee and for the Ugandan government we're talking about. So at this moment, we're exporting roughly 6 million bags. And that is an equivalent of roughly $1.2 billion paid out to the farmers.
Yeah.
So this is the equivalent for a metric ton that a farmer gets in his pocket. So the Ugandan rural community is now receiving this much money. We as Uganda have a national strategy and we want to boost it to 20 million bags. And a lot of people think this is impossible, this is never gonna work. But the moment we would achieve 20 million bags, we're talking about roughly $5 billion of additional revenues for, again, the Ugandan economy. But let me be specific, for the farmers in their pockets, in their field. 5 to 10 years, we're going to get there.
Okay.
And we're going to now leverage this EUDR opportunity to get this done. So I'd like to explain you how I, as a vision, representing the 8 bigger exporters and the consortium lead of EUDR. I just want to take you on a journey to explain that a bit better.
We're happy
But
to go along.
Also very important that right now Uganda is earning $6 billion from exporting all sorts of commodity. We already have roughly 18% market share in coffee, but the opportunity to add an additional 5 from the 6 we have in total from coffee only, that makes coffee one of the most powerful, influential, impactful commodities that we have right now in Uganda. So
With
I
the
think
collaboration you talked about earlier.
if we work together as an industry, I'm an optimist, not naive, but I think we're making great strides. And in the coming few months, we're going to lay the foundation of actually making this happen in such a way that the roasters all over the world think, hey, if I want to import coffee worth billions or millions of dollars per year, I'm going to think of Uganda because these guys are organized and I'm not having the risk of potentially as an importer getting those huge penalties and fines.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're all very scared about EUDR and how to tackle it. And I think it's important that it's more a matter of trust than there's a lack of technicalities because there's all sorts of tech and solutions available. It's just like how as an industry do we pick one solution that can help us all? So if we tackle EUDR, we do not necessarily help a farmer. The farmer will still sell his coffee to exporters. Exporters potentially just sell it in other countries. And so EUDR is a big burden to the exporters. The farmers themselves does not really matter.
No, I think if it's hinged on deforestation, then they also have the effects as farmers back in the countryside.
Absolutely.
Climate change.
Absolutely. But if you want to understand EUDR, EUDR is made to put a halt on deforestation. And it's done for a few commodities. One of them is beef, one of them is soya, one of them is cacao, and one of them is coffee. So with an agronomy background, I know that coffee actually thrives if you grow it as a shade tree on the other trees. So if I want to say a farmer, do you want to make 2 times more money with your coffee? Kindly just plant trees. If you want to drink soy milk in Europe, it could potentially mean that thousands of hectares somewhere in the Amazon are being bulldozed to grow a crop that needs full sun, that needs machinery, and that doesn't thrive on the shade trees. So we've actually tested, and we know already that unfortunately coffee is being put in this bucket of potential threatened products, but it's actually we're the other way around. So maybe it's defeating its purpose a bit, but I still love that we have EUDR because the things we're gonna achieve with this towards the $5 billion industry a year, that's what I'd like to explain later.
We're interested about the centralized approach.
Mm.
It's exciting to read about the farmer card. What is it all about? How does it work in practical terms?
So the farmer card, I think at this moment, most of the bigger exporters, so the 8 bigger exporters, roughly export 90% of all their coffee to Europe, Ugandan coffee. They all have direct supply chains. So all of them have 10, 15% of their farmers that are in a system, in a database. They maybe have a farmer card or a farmer code. And the moment they sell their coffee, mostly they're part of a bigger program and there's some privileges. But again, nobody's working together. If there's only 2 million farmers in Uganda, and by the way, it's funny, we are at this moment mapping all the farmers. We do that collectively, so maybe that's another step to explain. When we as UGACOF and other exporters needed to have a lot of polygons to somehow have their data right to keep exporting, people were going to do it on an individual basis. And they would pay maybe $10, $12, $15 to map one farmer in a system that could help you out.
The first deadline was last year.
Luckily, we were getting another year. However, our clients are already demanding. So if you're now on a market, you're going to impress them and you're going to build those 5 or 10 year partnerships. Everyone's using different farmer cards. In my vision, all the 2 million farmers, and we thought we had 1.3, 1.5 million farmers, nobody knew. As a collective, we hired one organization called Pula to help us to map all the farmers with one app, one efficient machine, one data warehouse, just do the job for us and map all the farmers to avoid that a lot of people create duplicates. And what we found, why did we reach out to Pula? They already had 15 million farmers in their database. They have $2 or $3 billion outstanding globally to insure those farmers for climate change. And we're like, they actually have a skill set that we need. They're the only one who can map 2 million farmers in 1 year. So at this moment, we have mapped the first 1 million
by technology. Is it satellite?
No, we have at the moment between 4,000 and 5,000 people with smartphones every day walking in the field. We're mapping roughly 20 to 30,000 farmers a day. We're now at half of the portion. And again, we thought we had 1.3 million farmers, but we're starting to have almost 2.5 million farmers. So the coming 4 or 5 months, the ministry, we used to have UCDA, and it's a bit transforming. The Ministry of Agriculture has given us more money to do the other half. The guys who were bold enough to help us with the first half, thanks to Moses, ABI development, they said, we want to help the exporters. Kindly exporters, tell us what you need. So this moment we mapped all these farms. The next step is back to your cards. All of these farmers would have one card. And let's work with the big guys like Visa or MasterCard. And that farmer card has a chip. Every time a farmer is bringing his coffee to a collection point, at that collection point we swipe the card. And that means that instantly 2 million farmers are now bankable because they have a kind of track record. 2 million farmers times maybe $1,000 a farmer lendable potential. We're talking about opening a market of $2 billion. That same farmer card should enable them to pay maybe NSSF. It should enable them to get health insurance like Turaco, and they're all over the country. It could enable them to request for school fees. We can maybe even use it as an ATM card. And the most important thing, that same card with the track record should be done in such a way, and the technology is there, that you walk to a random bank or microfinance institution, you swipe the card, and instantly you can see to which kind of services you're eligible. And let's take it even bigger. That card is going to be connected to our MTN, Airtel. Everyone who has a card, the card has a unique farmer code, could potentially go on the MTN menu, press blah, blah, blah for farmer loans or farmer services, and press this one for a health insurance, this one for a school fee loans, this one for a fertilizer loan, and instantly we know your track record, and things move on. So if we unite the industry through digitalization and those farmer cards, guess what? Access to finance for farmers.
Yeah.
So it becomes more easy to reach the 20 million back. But also all the village middlemen, they're now suddenly lendable. So MFIs could lend them money.
Yeah.
Banks could help with the bigger traders who bring on average between $1,500 a day. So suddenly our whole industry always have access to cash.
Yeah.
And in trading, it's all about being liquid.
Yes.
If you don't have money, you cannot
Cash
buy
flow.
coffee there. Yeah. Another thing which we think is rocket science, but it's not. Uganda has roughly 2 million farmers, roughly 1,000 filling stations, which are like the rural collection points where we do one step of the processing. And can you imagine what it would cost to have at every 1,000 of the filling station a Wi-Fi spot? That's not going to cost an arm and a leg,
No.
right?
No.
Can you imagine what it costs to everywhere have 1 or 2 tablets? So what it now comes down to, the farmer brings his coffee. He also comes with his farmer card.
Yeah.
He swipes his things at the tablet, and instantly he can see what kind of services there are being provided at that particular hurling station, because there's going to be competition.
Yeah.
The owner of the best hurling station might have 20 services. The lazy owner or the struggling or the startup owner has maybe 1 service.
Yeah.
And it's the same like if you're booking a hotel for your lovely wife to go on a holiday, you want that hotel to have services.
Yeah.
So the farmers are going to go to the hurling stations where most services are. At the same time, they could potentially tap a thing and see like, how do I stamp my coffee? How do I add 5, 6, 7 other crops on top of my coffee and work on my climate resilience, on my cash flow? So just to have 1,000 filling stations with a bit of Wi-Fi and at the same time some trainings and tablets, that shouldn't be rocket science. The industry is pouring dozens, hundreds of millions in it, but not in a collective way. And if we have structures in place in the Ugandan coffee sector, through the task force, through Coffee Africa, through all sorts of other organizations, if we say, don't pump your money in that $10 million in Mubende for 6,000 farmers, no, build the pillars of our huge impact and let's get it done. And it's my personal mission with the roles I play to convince donors and the bigger tech players like, hey guys, let's do it. Because if we nail it, sorry for the word, we can add $5 billion every year into the economy. And where do we need money? In rural areas. Another thing important to know, an average hurling station is pumping around between $5 and $7 million worth of coffee, because the average hurling station does maybe between 1,000 and 2,000 metric tons.
5 million?
Yeah. And it's very important that Airtel and MTN make sure that if we're going to go digital, because I've just explained all the advantages, it's very important that they have enough cash centers there so people can actually cash. Because otherwise people are all there with the digital money and they need to travel hours and hours to cash it. We've done a survey as Sukavina ourselves across our washing stations in the West, and on average 85% of the farmers could cash their money within 10 minutes. And people in the beginning, when we moved to fully digital at UGACOF 3 years ago, a lot of farmers run away. They say, I just need cash.
I would understand them. Farmers in the rural areas are very analog.
You're going to be surprised. The average farmer we interviewed, and we hired an independent impact survey company for it called 60 Decibels. We give them a lot of phone numbers, we did all their interviews and whatever. 90% of our farmers are already working with mobile money for over 8 years. People could cash their thing within 10 minutes. Some people lived a bit further away from the trade centers where there was such a mobile money kiosk. But I mean, we cannot rescue the whole world. And what you see in the beginning, when we went digital, farmers stayed away. Say, I need my cash. I don't trust this. Now people line up and say, hey, I bought a phone because I actually like my safety. If people see me driving in with a full truck of coffee, it means they're going to get $10,000 equivalent in UGX. The robbers are waiting you around the corner and all the family members as well. Now you keep it anonymously on your mobile money. And you have a kind of saving account which works on a simple Kabariti. So we've pumped dozens of millions in silos into the coffee industry. Have we seen the crop growing? Not really. Maybe through UCDA efforts, through a lot of positive propaganda in the newspapers and whatever. And there is a big trend. All the coffee countries around us shrinking. We are growing in terms of next year. But what I'm pitching for here is a collective centralized fund of $100 million. And that sounds a lot, but if you see what has been poured into the industry recently, it's not a lot.
And who runs the fund?
It's a huge consortium with specialized development partners. So, for example, Trademark Africa is very good in databases, government data, import data, export. Let them be in control of the data warehouse where we collectively and safely store that information. FAO by the United Nations have always been about yield increase. Let them set up the programs, maybe hire Coffee Africa or one of the other guys to like put that particular work stream. ABI Finance is all about access to finance for traders, middlemen, filling stations. Let them handle that portfolio. And you see with 2 million farmers that you would only give $250 each, you're already talking about $500 million being pumped in the industry. Everyone wants to help, but we need to give them a platform to explain, help us here.
Yeah.
Now, with that $100 million collective things, I'm gonna almost generate an additional $3.5 billion of coffee revenue for the community. So that means for every $1 they invest, they're gonna get roughly 33 impact dollars back. We call it a social return on investment.
In how long?
And of course, the aim is to go from 6 million bags to 20 million bags. That's the Ugandan strategy. We might need 2 or 3 years more, but that's okay. Even if we make 70% of the targets, we are revolutionizing the industry. And who says that the people in cacao and vanilla cannot take learnings and do the same? Who says that they cannot share our collection points? So we're going to take the lead in coffee because I think we're organized and we have that potential. But can you imagine if this drips out to other commodities? It'll be easy, but it's possible.
Now that we know the challenges you're facing, I mean, you've alluded to most of them. The biggest issue would be centralizing operations. I remember going last summer to the Netherlands, where my husband comes from, and we went with one of his family members to a wheat hurling station. It was quite impressive that we just brought a truckload of wheat and pour it in one place. Is this what you're trying to allude to? That any farmer can bring their coffee?
Yeah. So when I talk about collective efforts, every hurling station that's registered by UCDA has, for example, that tablet. Every farmer that is registered in our database has that same farmer card. On a national level, you're going to provide access to basic health, access to health insurance, access to school fee loans, labor loans, you name it. So if we build that infrastructure, at the end of the story, the average farmer is maybe 10-20% loyal, 10-20% productive. And it's very easy as a filling station owner to put some services out there to push from 10% loyalty to 20% loyalty. And suddenly that filling station is getting 2 times more volume. And then production. Coffee is a slow crop. So if you fertilize it now, only 1.5, 2 years later, you see the result. It's also a bit more complex. But if you apply both, so let's say 20% loyalty, 20% production, and both of them you're boosting into 50% loyalty or 50% production, it means that hurling station is suddenly getting 4 or 5 times more volumes. Its overhead reduces. He will easily earn back his expensive software system and whatever. And the government has been really helpful in coffee. So to, for example, say, the farmers as well. The farmers are willing because what we're gonna do is eventually benefiting them. They need to be resilient. They need to make way more money. And we as exporters, if we squeeze them and if we don't help them, we have no future business. So everyone thrives from a more productive farmer, from a more centralized system. And still the filling station owner himself, and he collects all that stuff, he can decide to wherever he wants to sell the coffee. The person who is that day paying the most is likely where they're gonna go. Great. That's how market works.
And I think that's where the challenge was, especially with the recent debate that a lot of farmers are not getting their money's worth, also because they're not adding value to the bean.
Yeah, that's gonna change because you're gonna end up exporting 100 containers to a big client in Europe. They see it's all EUDR compliant. We say, hey, we want you to pay a premium. For every metric ton we're shipping you, costing us $5,000 to buy, but maybe we want to have a premium of $200 for our efforts. With this system, if we digitalize, eventually our importer, our roaster across the globe can press a button, and all these farmers directly will be paid on their smart card that thing. So there is no way a trader, middleman, whatever is in between. And so if these farmers now feel resilient, they have access to training, access to inputs, access. And again, I'm an agronomist, so I'm obsessed by increasing production, adding a few crops around it. But the end of the story, if his kids are still dying of malaria, if he still can go to work because constantly sick, that also doesn't work. So there is something to say.
They don't
for
have
first
input.
yeah, inputs, but let's first make the farmer feel safe. He can get a school loan, whatever he needs, and pays it back in coffee. He can get health insurance whenever he needs, pays it back in coffee. So if we first build that social foundation, farmer feels safe. And yeah, exactly. And then he can start doing his production.
Now, Sjaak, here you are. You have the opportunity to change one thing. What would it be?
Yeah, I would refer to collective funding. And like I said, this is what collective action could look like. In the last months, I've been in touch with all these bigger donors who all want to help and support and grow the coffee industry. And again, they're seeking for a kind of guidance, like where do we step in? ABI development is already doing all this stuff. Is there room for us? So for me, it's to sit with the sector. So this is my vision and a big disclaimer. Yeah, on behalf of the task force, I've presented this, but this is not written in stone, right? So I think this journey towards $5 billion revenue every year, or towards 20 million bags, or towards leveraging EUDR as an opportunity, it needs to be broken down in work streams. So, for example, work stream number one, mapping farmers. Maybe work stream number two is digital farmer cards. Maybe another work stream is access to finance, and another one is maybe CSDDD readiness. Sounds also very scary. We have EUDR coming. Every container that lands cannot be part of deforestation. CSDDD is another level. Every container that lands cannot be part of all sorts of human rights stuff. Child labor,
Human
health
trafficking.
and safety, slavery, whatever, right? So we're going to use this existing system to, over time, as a collective sector, also tackle it. We all know child labor is a thing in a country as Uganda. Doesn't mean we cannot tackle it. If at every hurling stage you can swipe your card and you can get a labor force of young men who are trained and willing to work, you need to keep your kids in school. If you can get a school fee loan and you can pay it back in coffee 5 months later without any interest, great. So we can tackle even these social
Insurance.
So if it were me, shout out to all the bigger donors and development partners and all sorts of level. Let's stick to collective structure where we break down this journey into different work streams, and let's do it in a coordinated way. So here, for example, ABI development has already put in millions of dollars and a great job in mapping all the farmers. Who has done that? A technical service provider, because it's important we work with the best of the best people in the global industry, that whatever system we build, it doesn't have cheeky wiki car parts. When
What are
we
you
drive a
saying about
Ferrari,
Uganda?
we drive a Ferrari and we don't put in weird car parts.
Are you insinuating something?
Of course not. No, but I'm saying like it's very important because our exporters that export to Europe, they need to be compliant with so many data protection policy, and even their banks, a company like Sukafina needs to be very favored and trusted by banks. And the banks in our industry are the future of sustainability. Banks look 30 years ahead. So politics maybe
Even
5
with
years
us leapfrogging
so banks
mobile
are the
money.
one telling us if you want to borrow big amount of money to trade finance, make sure you're complying with ABCDE because otherwise you cannot justify to give you such large sums of money. Again, trading is trading, so it means a lot of money being pumped, small margins. So I don't want to create the impression that we're all making big money. No, at this moment, the farmer is having a blast. They're making more money. Like maybe last year, they've earned more than the last 6, 7 years altogether. So if you now go to the village and you ask Ado of the breweries, the beer consumption has shoot up. People are building houses, buying cars, buying more plots, coffee is going through the roof. However, for us as exporters, we have sometimes a lot of commitments from previous years. So we promise them to deliver so many containers this year. and suddenly it's costing us 3, 4, 5 times more, but the profit is not increasing. So we're taking way more risk, way more cost to trade the same volumes for very little margin. So the roasters and the coffee exporters in this time, they're on serious pressure. Farming. So that's actually a good thing. And can you imagine still the average farmer is producing at 20% of his capacity? If you're now a farmer and you're reaching the 10, 15 kilos per tree per year, you would be stupid to have a job. With a 50-acre farm, you can earn up to $10,000 a month. That's the situation now.
Okay, we can go on and on about this, which
course.
is very
Let's close it
interesting.
down.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for making time. But we have the very last question, the very question we ask every guest that comes onto the podcast. You have alluded already what a middle class economy would be, what your future looks like for 2030 seemed like for our farmer in the village.
Okay.
That way I
Okay.
know our
Yeah.
people, if they digitalize and they have all these farmer cards and they have insurance, they can take their kids to school, they have better medical health.
Yeah.
I think that is the middle class economy. Now, to get us from producing at 20%, how can we get them out there and achieve
Yeah.
that middle class economy by
I
2040?
think that's again breaking all the silence. Have one way of explaining good agricultural practices number X and Y and Z. Have a centralized system. For example, in 1990, Uganda was 2 times bigger than Vietnam. Vietnam was doing 1 million bags and we were doing 2. Right now we're at 6 and Vietnam is, I think, over 30. But in 2011, Vietnam was already at 30 million bags and we're still stuck at 6. And what did? They killed all the noise. I think if you want to do business, the art is like kill all the noise, make things practical, get them tackled and give them 100 legs and walk. And I think what we need to do this is make sure we focus on 4 or 5 interventions, making them more resilient in terms of shade trees, other crops, better cash flow, giving access to finance for inputs for the farm, but also the social services. So if we talk one voice and we don't confuse other farmers and the services for you as a civilian, you either pick MTN or Airtel. And that's it. So basically, if we have one voice, one story, and one focus, not be all over the place, focus on the 3 or 4 super essential things that are needed, better varieties, stamping, fertilizer, social services, we're gonna run and we're gonna thrive. I see in the future, I see young farmers making money, realizing that they make 5, 6, 7 times higher salaries than working at a corporate in compound. I see them taking loans for buying their neighbors and scaling, and I see them employing their village mates with super cool jobs. Not only about coffee, they're about data collection and like 4, 5, 6 different crops. So we're gonna make farming sexy again, and we're gonna make farming literally like future proof. And I
Was
think
it ever sexy? I don't think so.
I love it. I'm an agronomist. You're gonna see digitalization, de-risking, access to services, access to opportunity. If we tackle this right, I think, yeah, farming is gonna be awesome and great again. And you see a reverse brain drain. You're gonna see people
coming back home
from Kampala coming back home, making money.
or people abroad coming back home.
Yeah, and
Because there's a lot of Ugandan diaspora with a lot of land and it's just laying bare.
Uganda's untapped. This weekend I've been in Pakwach area. You see farms of 5,000 acres, 10,000 acres. We could be the potential food basket. I'm not saying coffee is directly food, but yeah, we need to make the farmers
get the forex.
We need to make it six, and we can.
So anybody interested in what you said right now, where do they follow up? Where do we find you?
I can be found in the task force.
Okay.
And I'll be in the think tank of EUDR, Brew Coffee Africa. Myself, I'm transitioning from employment to my own kind of ideas. But in the coming months, that will become more clear.
Congratulations. We wish you the best of luck. Hopefully, we actually achieve these numbers.
Because try it. No guts, no glory.
5 years from now, we hope you achieve that together with the collective, and only the best of luck. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
And it's a wrap.
Wow. How many minutes did that take?
Thank you for listening in this far. I really hope that this conversation was helpful to you. Share this episode with your colleagues or friends that you think will benefit from this information. Let them know what you're listening to. Would you also rate our podcast? Because once you rate our podcast, other people like you are able to listen to this information and use it to their own benefit. On a lighter note, follow us on TikTok and Instagram. We really would love to hear your